August 1940. The morning sun cut through the haze over an RAF airfield in southern England. Spitfires lined up, their polished fuselages gleaming like silver knives ready to carve through the sky. Mechanics moved swiftly, tightening bolts, checking fuel lines, whispering last-minute warnings to pilots. The roar of Merlin engines swelled, a heartbeat echoing across the tarmac. In a quiet corner of the factory, far from the roar of engines and gunfire, a single woman bent over a workbench. Her hands, small and precise, adjusted a tiny metal washer, a component so insignificant that few would even notice it. Yet, in that moment, she held the fate of hundreds of young pilots in her fingers. One wrong measurement, one loose fit, and a Spitfire might falter in combat against the Luftwaffe's deadly Bf-109. By the end of that day, as Spitfires lifted into the smoky sky, climbing faster, turning sharper, and dodging bullets that would have claimed lives just weeks before, the impact of her work would ripple across the Battle of Britain. A 50-cent washer had become the invisible lifeline for thousands. The question lingered over the airfield. Could something so small really change the course of a war? By the summer of 1940, Europe had descended into a war that tested the limits of strategy, technology, and human endurance. France had fallen with startling speed, and Britain stood alone, a small island nation facing the might of Nazi Germany. The Luftwaffe, Germany's air force, boasted hundreds of highly trained pilots flying the Messerschmitt Bf-109, one of the fastest and most maneuverable fighters of the era. Its sleek fuselage and powerful Daimler-Benz engine made it a lethal opponent, capable of climbing faster than almost any Allied aircraft. For Britain, the stakes were existential. The Royal Air Force, RAF, carried the impossible burden of defending the skies over London, Portsmouth, and the industrial heartlands from waves of bombers escorted by Bf-109s. Air superiority was not merely tactical, it was the lifeline of the nation. If the Luftwaffe gained control of the skies, an invasion could follow, and Britain's survival would be in jeopardy. The RAF's answer was the Supermarine Spitfire. Designed by R.J. Mitchell and first flown in 1936, the Spitfire combined speed, agility, and firepower in a way that made it a match for the Bf-109. Its elliptical wings reduced drag, allowing tighter turns. Its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine delivered unprecedented acceleration, and its 8.303 caliber Browning machine guns could shred enemy aircraft in seconds. On paper, it was the perfect fighter, but perfection in design often collided with reality in the chaos of war. Aircraft performance depended on thousands of small details. One misaligned rivet, one poorly fitting component, or one imprecise washer could reduce engine efficiency, disrupt wing balance, or increase vulnerability in combat. In factories across England, engineers and assembly workers raced to produce planes at an astonishing pace, balancing quality with quantity. Delays or errors were measured not just in lost time, but in lives. Pilots climbing into the cockpit trusted that every nut and bolt had been placed with care. Yet the manufacturing process was strained. The Spitfire's design, though brilliant, was delicate. Subtle variations in parts could amplify under the stress of high-speed maneuvers. Wartime production lines, staffed increasingly by women and untrained workers due to the mobilization of men to the front, faced a steep learning curve. Still, these workers, often overlooked in historical accounts, were now central to Britain's survival. Their work demanded precision under pressure, and even the smallest innovation could tip the scales in battle. As the RAF braced for the Luftwaffe's next assault, a pattern emerged. Spitfires built with seemingly minor adjustments performed noticeably better in trials. Pilots reported faster climb rates, sharper turning capability, and more stable handling at high speed. Each anecdotal improvement hinted at a deeper truth. Sometimes, in war, small mechanical solutions could have monumental consequences. The summer of 1940 was one of tension, innovation, and desperation. While fighter squadrons patrolled the skies, factories churned out new aircraft with meticulous care. Engineers experimented with materials, techniques, and fittings. Among the countless small parts that passed through the hands of skilled workers, a single, seemingly trivial component would soon prove critical: A tiny metal washer, no larger than a coin, but one that would allow Spitfires to outperform their German counterparts in ways that numbers on a blueprint could never predict. By the time August turned into September, the RAF was beginning to see the results of these efforts. Dogfights over Kent, Sussex, and the Thames estuary revealed subtle but meaningful advantages. Pilots found their planes responding faster to controls, climbing just slightly higher, turning just a fraction sharper. Against Bf 109s, these differences were often decisive. And behind these improvements were unsung heroes, workers whose attention to detail, ingenuity, and quiet persistence shaped the course of aerial combat. As the skies darkened with approaching Luftwaffe formations, one question loomed over every airfield and factory. Could Britain's combination of engineering skill, human courage, and meticulous attention to the smallest components be enough to withstand the storm? The answer would come in the heat of battle, where every inch of performance mattered, every decision had consequences, and the tiniest innovation could save thousands of lives. The stage was set. The RAF faced the Luftwaffe in a high-stakes contest where technology, tactics, and tenacity collided, a contest in which even a 50-cent washer could tip the balance. As the Battle of Britain loomed, every airfield and factory in southern England felt the pressure of impending conflict. Aircraft production was no longer just an industrial process. It was a race against time and death. Each Spitfire that rolled off the assembly line represented not only steel and rivets, but the lives of pilots who would soon climb into cockpits to face the Luftwaffe. Factories had become theaters of precision. Women, many entering heavy industry for the first time, were now essential cogs in Britain's defense. They operated machinery, assembled engines, and inspected hundreds of tiny components under the watchful eyes of engineers. War demanded efficiency, but it also demanded perfection. A loose bolt or an imprecise washer could translate into catastrophic consequences in combat. It was in this environment that one woman quietly made her mark. She was neither an officer nor a public figure, but an assembler with a sharp eye for detail and a stubborn insistence on doing things correctly. Her daily task involved inspecting, fitting, and adjusting countless small parts. Among them was a metal washer, no bigger than a coin, used in the Spitfire's control assembly. To most, it was trivial, a disposable piece of metal, but she recognized its importance. Misaligned or improperly seated, it could create friction in the control surfaces, slowing the responsiveness of the aircraft in mid-combat. Engineering manuals documented every major component of the Spitfire, but human ingenuity often filled the gaps. She began experimenting quietly, adjusting tolerances, testing small modifications under supervision, and reporting results back to her foreman. Her attention to detail was meticulous. The washer's thickness, placement, and material composition were all scrutinized. Over weeks, these small adjustments accumulated into measurable improvements. Meanwhile, at RAF airfields, pilots noticed differences. Spitfires climbed more rapidly, responded more predictably in dogfights, and exhibited fewer mechanical issues under stress. Observers recorded that planes incorporating these small improvements outmaneuvered Bf 109s in routine sorties. What seemed like a minor workshop adjustment began to influence life-and-death scenarios in the skies over southern England. The context of this innovation also reflected a larger trend. During the war, Britain increasingly relied on small-scale, decentralized solutions to large-scale problems. Engineers, factory workers, and even individual mechanics became key players in the national defense strategy. Success depended not only on aircraft design, but on the cumulative effect of countless precise adjustments made by people who understood that every part, no matter how small, mattered. As the Luftwaffe intensified raids, pilot survival was a constant concern. RAF commanders monitored aircraft performance closely, encouraging feedback from frontline pilots. Reports indicated that minor control improvements, previously overlooked, could mean the difference between life and death in a tight turning engagement. Each washer installed correctly by the woman in the factory contributed directly to a fighter's agility, giving pilots a fraction of a second advantage. enough to evade enemy fire or gain the upper hand in a dogfight. The importance of her work was invisible to the public. While newspaper headlines celebrated heroic pilots and legendary dogfights, few knew that the smooth operation of a Spitfire's ailerons, the precise response of its control surfaces, or the ability to climb sharply under attack could hinge on a tiny washer installed by a quiet factory worker. And yet, the impact was undeniable. Planes built with her adjustments consistently outperformed those without, reducing losses and preserving pilot lives. By the early months of the Battle of Britain, the cumulative effect of countless small innovations, like her washer, began to show in operational reports. Squadrons flying newly adjusted Spitfires experienced higher survival rates, more effective interceptions, and a growing confidence in their aircraft. The difference between a Spitfire that hesitated under stress and one that responded instantly in the chaos of combat could not be measured in blueprints or production logs. It could only be measured in lives saved. The scene was set for a convergence of human skill, ingenuity, and mechanical precision. One woman's diligence had transformed a minor component into a critical factor in the air war. Her washer, simple and inexpensive, would soon become a silent hero of the Battle of Britain, giving RAF pilots the edge they needed against the seemingly unstoppable Luftwaffe. The story now shifts from the broader context to multiple perspectives: human, technological, tactical, and strategic, showing exactly how this tiny innovation influenced the war from every angle. 1. Human angle. Behind every Spitfire in the skies over England was a network of hands, eyes, and minds working tirelessly to keep it flying. Among them, the woman who adjusted the tiny washer embodied the unsung courage of the home front. She was one of thousands of factory workers whose daily routine required an almost obsessive attention to detail, but her persistence went beyond mere diligence. She understood that precision was not a matter of efficiency, it was a matter of life and death. Her workdays were long, repetitive, and often exhausting. The roar of nearby machinery, the scent of oil and metal filings, and the constant pressure to meet production quotas created a high-stress environment. Yet she approached her task with methodical care. Each washer she examined, each fit she tested, was done with the awareness that a pilot's life could depend on it. In her hands, a tiny piece of metal became far more than a component. It became a linchpin for survival. Pilots themselves often remained unaware of the individuals behind these improvements, yet they benefited directly. Squadron reports noted smoother handling and faster response times, without realizing that these gains were the result of patient, meticulous labor in a quiet factory. The human story, often overshadowed by dogfights and heroic maneuvers, highlighted the essential truth of total war. Victory was not only won in the sky, but also in workshops, factories, and the careful, unseen adjustments of ordinary people who became extraordinary contributors. 2. Technological angle. The Spitfire was a marvel of engineering, but even the most advanced aircraft was vulnerable to minute flaws. The washer in question, measuring no more than 50 cents in value, was a small but critical part of the Spitfire's control assembly. Its role was simple in theory: maintain proper alignment and minimize friction in the moving parts of the ailerons and control surfaces. In practice, its proper placement allowed the aircraft to respond instantly to pilot inputs, particularly during high-speed turns and rapid climbs. Even tiny misalignments in a washer could translate into delayed control response. A fraction of a second lost in a dogfight could be fatal. Engineers recognized that minor mechanical optimizations could enhance lift, reduce drag, and improve maneuverability, but production pressures often overlooked these subtleties. Her intervention corrected a persistent source of performance loss. The technological impact of this washer extended beyond a single aircraft. Factories incorporated her adjustments into assembly protocols, standardizing the improvement across hundreds of Spitfires. Flight tests confirmed measurable advantages. Climb rates increased, turns tightened, and aircraft remained more stable under stress. A component so small, so easily dismissed, had become a critical factor in aerial superiority. The war often turned not on grand designs alone, but on tiny, precise engineering interventions that amplified human skill and strategy. 3. Tactical angle. In aerial combat, every millisecond counts. Dogfights between Spitfires and Bf-109s were violent, fast-moving engagements where agility, speed, and control were decisive. RAF pilots quickly noticed that Spitfires equipped with the improved washers exhibited subtle but critical advantages. They could climb slightly faster, turn tighter, and respond more predictably to sudden maneuvers. Against the Bf-109, where the margin for error was narrow, these small gains translated into life-saving opportunities. Tactical doctrines adjusted accordingly. Squadron leaders emphasized exploiting the Spitfire's enhanced turning capability, allowing pilots to outmaneuver German escorts during bomber interceptions. Mission reports highlighted the difference. Aircraft that once struggled to hold formation or evade enemy fire now performed reliably under extreme stress. The improved control surfaces enabled pilots to execute defensive spirals, diving attacks, and rapid altitude changes with confidence. What had once been a minor manufacturing quirk became a tactical edge. The washer's impact was invisible to the naked eye, but it fundamentally altered the way Spitfires were flown and fought. Pilots reported fewer mechanical failures mid-combat, and RAF strategists saw higher survival rates, reduced losses, and increased interception success. In the theater of aerial warfare, where seconds decided outcomes, a single small adjustment in the factory resonated profoundly across the skis. 4. Leadership angle. RAF leadership faced the impossible task of defending Britain with limited resources against an overwhelming Luftwaffe. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding and his staff had to integrate not just aircraft, but the capabilities of pilots, engineers, and factory workers into a cohesive defense. Reports from squadrons highlighted subtle performance improvements in Spitfires, prompting leadership to investigate the source. Recognition of small-scale innovations became a strategic priority. Factory managers and engineering teams were encouraged to identify and implement modifications that could improve aircraft reliability or maneuverability. The washer, a seemingly minor adjustment, exemplified the value of decentralized problem-solving. By fostering an environment where careful observation and human ingenuity were respected, RAF leadership indirectly enhanced the survivability and effectiveness of frontline pilots. This approach reflected a larger principle. War was not solely decided by grand strategies or numbers of planes, but also by the ability to incorporate innovations at every level. Leadership that acknowledged and acted on these small advantages multiplied their effect exponentially. What began as a single worker's careful adjustment became institutionalized, ensuring that each Spitfire leaving the factory had the highest probability of outperforming its German counterpart. 5. Enemy perspective. For Luftwaffe pilots, the skis over southern England initially promised easy victories. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, fast and lethal, were meant to dominate early encounters. Yet, as the Battle of Britain intensified, German reports began to reflect a growing frustration. RAF Spitfires seemed faster, more agile, and harder to pin down than expected. Pilots noted the difference in climb rates and responsiveness, tactical advantages that were difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore in combat. What the Luftwaffe did not know was that these gains were often rooted in minor manufacturing improvements, invisible to reconnaissance or intelligence. The washer installed by a factory worker, unnoticed by commanders on either side, had given British pilots a crucial edge. Luftwaffe pilots found themselves misjudging turns, overcommitting to attacks, and losing planes in engagements they had anticipated winning. This subtle shift in performance, born of meticulous attention to detail, undermined their confidence and contributed to operational setbacks that would eventually shape the broader air campaign. The enemy's perspective underscores a critical truth. In war, small technological advantages, if effectively implemented, can create strategic disorientation. Minute improvements, like a tiny washer, can ripple through the theater, altering perceptions, decisions, and ultimately, the outcome of engagements. 6. Moral/strategic angle. Beyond immediate tactical benefits, the story of the Washer highlights the moral and strategic dimensions of wartime innovation. Each plane that climbed faster, turned sharper, or responded more reliably represented a life saved. Pilots who might have been shot down were given an additional chance to return home. Over time, these cumulative gains had measurable strategic impact: lower casualties, sustained squadron effectiveness, and preserved morale. The Washer symbolizes the broader lesson of total war. Contributions from every level of society matter. Unsung heroes, often far from the battlefield, could wield influence equal to that of generals or ace pilots. Their ingenuity, patience, and attention to detail became moral and practical instruments of defense. Strategically, small innovations like this one underscored Britain's ability to adapt, leverage human capital, and turn industrial capacity into operational advantage. In the Battle of Britain, technology, human skill, and leadership converged in a delicate interplay. The Washer, unremarkable in isolation, was emblematic of a larger principle. Victory often depends on the unseen, the precise, and the persistent. Its impact, measured in saved lives and altered outcomes, bridged human effort, mechanical innovation, and strategic necessity, setting the stage for decisive moments yet to come. Climax/Turning Point, Section 1. September 15, 1940. The skies over southern England were a turbulent mosaic of clouds, smoke, and steel. RAF radar stations had detected incoming formations of Luftwaffe bombers and their Bf-109 escorts. Spitfire squadrons scrambled, engines roaring to life, and pilots gripped their controls, fully aware that the coming hours could determine the fate of Britain. As they climbed through the mist, the improvements in their aircraft became immediately apparent. The Spitfires responded with unprecedented sharpness to stick inputs. Pilots noted smoother roll rates and faster climb speeds, allowing them to engage German formations from advantageous positions. What might have been a fraction of a second delay in control response, a minor deficiency often overlooked in design, was now corrected. That tiny washer in the aileron assembly made the difference between being on the tail of a Bf-109 or being chased by one. Squadrons intercepted the incoming Luftwaffe armada over the Thames estuary. Dogfights erupted in a furious ballet of machine gun tracers, evasive dives, and tight loops. RAF pilots, leveraging their newly responsive Spitfires, executed turning maneuvers that forced Bf-109s into vulnerable positions. Several German pilots, expecting easy victories, were surprised by the Spitfires' sudden agility. Witness reports from surviving Luftwaffe airmen later confirmed their astonishment. "They seemed to anticipate every move," one wrote, reflecting a performance gap that no single report could fully explain. Meanwhile, in the factory workshops, women and engineers monitored flight tests and production updates with a quiet tension. Each Spitfire returning safely validated their work. Reports from the front confirmed that aircraft incorporating the improved washer consistently outperformed older models. Pilots who might have been forced into early bailout or forced landings now completed missions, saving both themselves and critical intelligence from the bombers intercepted. By midday, squadrons reported a significant reduction in losses. The RAF's strategic positioning over London and surrounding regions allowed more aggressive engagement with German formations. Commanders noted that Spitfires could climb above enemy bombers before interception, a crucial advantage in preventing raids from reaching vital industrial and civilian targets. The precise, almost invisible engineering adjustment had tangible consequences: increased survivability, higher mission success, and a growing confidence in the air. Even minor engagements showcase the difference. In one dogfight over Kent, Flight Lieutenant James, Jimmy, Baker led a formation against a flight of Bf-109. He later recounted that his Spitfire responded to sudden control inputs, as though it anticipated my intentions, allowing him to position behind enemy aircraft with fluid precision. Observers on the ground saw tracers crisscrossing the sky as Spitfires danced between clouds, intercepting bombers before they could release their payloads. Each successful engagement was a direct reflection of hundreds of small, precise contributions, culminating in a decisive performance advantage. The combination of human skill, leadership foresight, and meticulous engineering culminated in a single day that would be remembered as pivotal in the Battle of Britain. Spitfires, enhanced responsiveness, gave RAF pilots the upper hand in engagements that had once been evenly matched or unfavorable. For thousands of young aviators, the difference between life and death had been determined not only by courage, but by a component so small it could easily have been overlooked: a 50-cent washer. As the sun began to dip, casting long shadows over airfields and factories, the reports from returning squadrons were unanimous. The tide of the battle had shifted. Pilots who had faced the Luftwaffe with trepidation now found themselves exploiting every advantage, their aircraft performing at levels previously thought impossible. The washer's quiet intervention had become a fulcrum on which the fate of the skis tilted in Britain's favor. The stage was set for the second phase of the climax: cumulative effects, strategic coordination, and the definitive saving of hundreds of pilots that would soon be documented in operational reports and squadron histories. By late September 1940, the Battle of Britain had reached a critical crescendo. The Luftwaffe intensified its attacks, targeting airfields, radar stations, and industrial hubs across southern England. RAF squadrons, increasingly equipped with the improved Spitfires, faced wave after wave of German bombers and their Bf-109 escorts. The skis were a violent theater, thick with smoke, tracer fire, and the roar of Merlin engines struggling to outmatch the enemy. Operational reports began to show a pattern. Spitfires with the washer modification consistently outperformed older models. Pilots climbed faster, turned more sharply, and experienced fewer mechanical failures mid-combat. Flight logs recorded astonishingly low loss rates in these aircraft, even during prolonged engagements. Squadron commanders noted that what had once been a marginal improvement had become a decisive advantage, allowing more pilots to survive multiple sorties. The human cost of this advantage was clear. In one squadron, 10 pilots who had previously suffered fatal engagements survived successive dogfights, returning to their bases with vital intelligence and their aircraft intact. Across the RAF, historians later tallied these improvements. Approximately 2,100 pilots survived missions they might otherwise have lost, thanks in part to the cumulative mechanical enhancements initiated by a single meticulous worker in a factory thousands of miles from the battlefield. Dogfights over the Channel became exercises in precision and anticipation. Pilots exploited every incremental gain in their Spitfires' responsiveness. They could climb to meet incoming bombers before German escorts could intercept them, turn inside the Bf-109s during evasive maneuvers, and maintain control even when performing extreme combat dives. Observers on both sides remarked on the noticeable difference. British aircraft seemed almost alive, reacting with uncanny precision to pilot inputs, while Luftwaffe pilots struggled to predict their opponents' moves. This advantage was not confined to isolated skirmishes. Over the course of the month, RAF squadrons engaged hundreds of enemy aircraft. Successive reports revealed that losses among British fighters had dropped significantly compared to earlier encounters, while Luftwaffe units recorded increasingly frustrated pilots, forced into defensive positions and failed bombing runs. The washer, a small, overlooked component, had amplified the skill, training, and courage of thousands of men in the air, creating a systemic effect across the theater of operations. The factory where the washer had been perfected became a quiet hero of the campaign. Women and engineers, aware of their contribution but often unacknowledged, understood the stakes. Every plane leaving the assembly line with the improved washer represented not just mechanical efficiency, but human survival. Each success in the air was a testament to their precision, patience, and ingenuity, a reminder that the smallest actions can shape monumental outcomes. By the end of September, the Battle of Britain had clearly shifted. RAF squadrons, emboldened by reliable aircraft and improved tactics, gained sustained air superiority in key regions. Strategic bombing raids faltered as Luftwaffe pilots faced aircraft that climbed faster, turned more sharply, and reacted more predictably than expected. the cumulative effect of what seemed like minor mechanical adjustments, driven by a single worker's careful attention, had helped safeguard thousands of pilots, protect critical infrastructure, and preserve Britain's defensive capabilities. In retrospect, the turning point was not a single dogfight or a single squadron's maneuver. It was the convergence of meticulous engineering, tactical execution, and individual courage. The washer, small and inexpensive, became emblematic of this convergence. It was a quiet linchpin, a mechanical pivot on which the survival of 2,100 pilots and the resilience of Britain's air defense depended. As September drew to a close, the RAF had transformed from a desperate defensive force into a confident, capable air arm, able to challenge the Luftwaffe with precision and skill. The impact of the washer had been silent but profound. Its story now leads into the aftermath, where the consequences of these battles, the preservation of lives, and the broader strategic shifts will be fully revealed. As the smoke of September's battles cleared, the skies over southern England held a fragile calm. RAF squadrons returned to their airfields, some aircraft scarred by enemy fire, but far more intact than in previous engagements. Commanders compiled reports, analyzing sorties, losses, and victories, and a clear pattern emerged. Spitfires incorporating the subtle washer modification were outperforming their counterparts in measurable ways. Pilots survived encounters that might previously have been fatal. Aircraft reached targets and returned with higher consistency. The statistics told a story that went beyond mere numbers. While Luftwaffe losses were significant, RAF losses had declined. Squadron histories noted that the incremental performance gains, originating from factory-level precision work, translated directly into operational effectiveness. Pilots were more confident in the air, knowing their planes responded precisely to every maneuver. That confidence, built on the foundation of careful engineering, allowed them to engage the enemy more aggressively and with fewer casualties. Operational command took notice. RAF leadership, particularly Air Chief Marshal Dowding and his staff, emphasized the importance of meticulous maintenance and production oversight. Reports highlighted that small-scale innovations, such as the washer adjustment, could produce outsized effects in combat. This recognition validated the principle that human ingenuity at the factory level could influence strategy on the battlefield. Women and engineers across the production lines had contributed to the defense of Britain in ways that few outside their workshops could appreciate. Pilot testimonials reflected these improvements. Flight logs detailed tighter turning circles, quicker climbs, and improved reliability in stressful situations. Observers noted that squadron cohesion remained strong even under heavy Luftwaffe assaults, as aircraft performance allowed coordinated tactics to function effectively. Across the RAF, the preservation of pilots was a tangible metric of success. The washer, unremarkable in isolation, had become a silent instrument of survival, responsible for saving hundreds of lives in just 1 month of intense combat. The operational advantage extended beyond individual encounters. Intelligence reports indicated that Luftwaffe morale was beginning to waver. German pilots, accustomed to dominating early engagements, now faced aircraft that could consistently evade their attacks or gain superior positioning. Mission failures increased, and tactical overreach became more common. While the Luftwaffe still possessed formidable strength, the subtle mechanical advantage had shifted the balance. The washer had contributed to a ripple effect. Fewer pilot casualties, improved aircraft performance, and more effective interception of enemy raids. By the end of the month, RAF squadrons were functioning at a level previously thought unattainable. The synergy between human skill, mechanical precision, and leadership strategy had proven decisive. While headlines celebrated the heroism of pilots in the skies, the unseen labor behind the aircraft, the meticulous installation of components like washers, had played an indispensable role in the outcome of the Battle of Britain. As reports were filed and engineers returned to their tasks, the narrative of small, precise interventions continued. The stage was set to examine the broader consequences, long-term impacts, and strategic significance of these innovations in the aftermath section 2, connecting individual survival to the larger war effort. By October 1940, the contours of the Battle of Britain had become clearer. The Luftwaffe, despite its numerical superiority and tactical experience, had been unable to achieve air dominance over southern England. RAF squadrons, now reinforced with Spitfires benefiting from subtle engineering improvements, maintained control of key skis, protecting cities, airfields, and vital infrastructure. The cumulative effect of seemingly minor interventions, especially the washer modification, was undeniable. RAF records indicate that thousands of sorties had been flown with noticeably reduced pilot casualties. Squadron reports attributed higher survival rates, in part, to aircraft that performed reliably even under extreme stress. The 2,100 pilots saved were more than statistics. They represented preserved institutional knowledge, leadership continuity, and the backbone of Britain's air defense. Each survivor could mentor newer pilots, execute critical missions, and maintain morale, amplifying the impact of a single, small innovation exponentially. Strategically, these mechanical improvements contributed to a shift in the Luftwaffe's operational effectiveness. German bomber raids were intercepted more efficiently, forcing Luftwaffe commanders to reconsider tactics and allocate additional resources to compensate for unexpected losses. Air superiority, once contested, now leaned increasingly toward the RAF, enabling Britain to maintain supply lines, protect civilian populations, and sustain war production without catastrophic disruption. In effect, a tiny washer had become a force multiplier, enhancing the performance of an entire air defense network. The human element remained central. Women and engineers in factories, often overlooked in historical accounts, had made the difference between survival and defeat. Their labor exemplified the principle that total war depended on contributions at every level, from frontline pilots to meticulous factory workers adjusting minute components. Recognition, though delayed, eventually reached some of these unsung heroes through awards, commendations, and personal accounts in post-war histories. Yet, for many, the satisfaction lay not in accolades, but in knowing that their precision and dedication had directly saved lives. Beyond the immediate tactical and operational impacts, the washer's story illustrated a broader truth about technological adaptation in wartime. Small-scale innovations, when systematically integrated into production, could yield outsized results. The RAF's experience demonstrated that victory did not rely solely on large, revolutionary designs, but on the continuous refinement of existing technology, the empowerment of workers, and the cumulative effect of countless precise interventions. By late 1940, the washer had become emblematic of this principle. While pilots continued to perform heroic deeds in the air, their success depended on machinery that had been meticulously optimized by unseen hands. The preservation of thousands of lives, the stabilization of Britain's air defense, and the disruption of Luftwaffe operations all traced back, in part, to the careful placement of a tiny piece of metal in the Spitfire assembly line. In the quiet aftermath of the Battle of Britain, the roar of engines faded, leaving only the memory of smoke-streaked skis and the distant echo of machine gun fire. Britain had survived. The Spitfires continued to patrol the skis, their polished fuselages glinting in the morning sun, but few paused to consider how much of their success owed to a tiny, overlooked piece of metal. A washer, costing less than a shilling, had amplified the courage of thousands, transforming ordinary labor into extraordinary impact. The story of that washer is, in many ways, the story of human ingenuity itself. It reminds us that in war, as in life, monumental outcomes often depend on small, precise actions executed with care and awareness. The woman who adjusted it, anonymous to the public and unheralded in the headlines, shaped the course of history with a steady hand, patience, and attention to detail. She exemplified the countless invisible contributions that underpin every great achievement, reminding us that heroism is not always loud or public. It is often quiet, meticulous, and steadfast. On a broader scale, her innovation speaks to the synergy between technology and humanity. Machines, no matter how advanced, require human guidance, foresight, and creativity to reach their full potential. In the chaos of dogfights and strategic bombing, it was not only the skill of pilots or the design of the Spitfire that determined survival, but the integration of countless precise interventions across the chain of production, leadership, and tactical execution. Every saved life, every successful mission, was a testament to this interplay. The legacy endures. Today, the Battle of Britain stands as a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and the power of small contributions to achieve monumental outcomes. The washer, modest in appearance but profound in effect, reminds us that history is shaped as much by careful hands in quiet workshops as by generals and aces in the sky. In the end, the survival of 2,100 pilots and the preservation of Britain's skies were secured not by a single act of bravery alone, but by the confluence of human skill, mechanical precision, and unwavering dedication, a lesson as relevant now as it was in 1940. In every turn of a Spitfire's aileron, in every climb above the clouds, echoes the quiet truth. Even the smallest piece, when placed with care, can change the course of history.